You're listening to episode 287 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the official podcast of the Secular Buddhist Association, a grassroots-driven effort to answer the needs of secular teaching and practice for contemporary society. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the SBA website has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Though the podcast focuses on core practices from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Justin Merritt returns to speak with us about his upcoming Buddhist orchestral premiere, The Path. Hi, everyone. I want to thank you for supporting the Secular Buddhist Association with your generous contributions. Because of that dana, we're able to continue offering this podcast, the discussions on our website, secularbuddhism.org, and of course, our live online practice circle. And if you haven't yet, you're welcome to visit the website and show your appreciation, as we appreciate you listening in and sharing your own voice in this exploration of the Dhamma in our lives. Buddhism may not be known for its presence in orchestral music. In April of 2018, it will be taking a big step forward in Orchestral Hall in my old home of Minneapolis with their premiere of The Path. Composer Justin Merritt was the youngest ever winner of the ASCAP Foundation Rudolf Nissim Award. He's also the winner of a host of other awards, including the McKnight Fellowship, the Copeland Award, and Polyphonos Prize. His music has been played by the Minnesota Orchestra, Indianapolis Symphony, and on a Prairie Home Companion. He received his bachelor's degree from Trinity University and his master's degree and doctorate from Indiana University. He studied composition with Samuel Adler, Sven David Sandstrom, Claude Baker, Timothy Kramer, Don Freund, and electronic and computer music with Jeffrey Haas. He is currently Associate Professor of Composition at St. Olaf College. His evening-length oratorio, The Path, will be premiered at Orchestral Hall in Minneapolis in April 2018. The work is a collection of Buddhist Pali scriptures translated by the composer and set for multiple choirs, soloists, and a large orchestra. So, sit back, relax, and have a nice orange pico orchestral tea. Our guest today returning to the podcast is our friend Justin Merritt. Justin, welcome back to the podcast. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you again, Ted. Thanks.
So this is a special treat because you're calling from my old home, Minnesota, and unfortunately not there anymore. So we have to do this at a distance, but I'm very glad to see you, and especially this topic we're going to be talking about today. But before we go into that, let's catch up a little bit. It's been a bit over 3 years since we last spoke about simple suttas. So give us an update on that. And how have you been? How have you been the past 2 years?
Oh, I've been great. Lots going on. Simple Suttas is still there. I got to do a little series with David Treyas, this wonderful Buddhist in Minnesota. We discovered each other through that and did some kind of long conversations breaking down some individual suttas, the most recent Samanyapala Sutta and all that. But fewer updates, especially lately. I've had David just had a baby, and I've been department chair, so it's been a little thin on the ground with posts. But I hope to change that soon.
Now, were you? I don't recall if you were department chair when we last spoke, or if that's something that you have transitioned into.
That's new, and it's been really great to be able to kind of help my colleagues in that way. But it's a lot.
Well, congratulations and sorry.
Thanks.
Well, let's dive into the thick of this. Tell us about your new project. And is this something you've been thinking of for a long time, or is this a relatively recent thing?
It is. Well, the project is a large evening length piece of music for orchestra, choir, soloists, all settings from the Pali Canon. So if you know Carmina Burana, orchestral choir soloist kind of piece, it's something similar to that.
Everyone introduced to that music in Excalibur.
Right. Well, if this can be in as many movies as Carmina Burana has, then that's pretty good. But yeah, no, it's 90 minutes, 28 different selections from the Poly Canon. It'll be performed April 22nd, Minneapolis Orchestra Hall downtown by St. Olaf Choir, St. Olaf Orchestra, 300 musicians, professional soloists. So it's gonna be great.
Outstanding. So tell us about how did this start? When did you first get the idea to do this?
Actually, today I realized that the first little bit of it was 10 years ago. I wrote a setting of Fire Sermon for the St. Olaf Chapel Choir and Chris Ospas, and they did just a beautiful job of it. It was such an awesome experience. It's such an awesome experience to just kind of be able to work with the Buddha's words in that way and have this very dramatic, intense kind of setting of it. And so we decided to do a full length piece along those same lines. And it's just been, he ended up getting a different job and it was almost didn't happen. And it was, I really, really thought for a minute that I had done, literally years of work without any kind of fruition. So it feels like a little miracle that it's actually happening.
So glad that's working. So tell us about the writing process for those of us who are not composers. What is it like?
Well, the first part was just the text. And I sat down with it. And my first thought was to set it all in Pali. And kind of in talking with the choir director, I decided instead to make it a mix of English and Pali so that it would be more immediate. And some pieces that people would hear the sound of Pali, they would get to kind of have that sound world, but then also have other pieces where you're hearing it with that kind of immediacy. If you listen to a lot of classical music, most of it is in French, English, Italian, things like that. Most of the famous pieces. And it's beautiful, but it's also, there's a little bit of a separation there. Different to go to a musical in English than to go to an opera in Italian. Mm-hmm. And so we decided to have some pieces in English just for that different kind of emotional experience. And so I looked at the translations, and of course, there are beautiful translations out there. Bhikkhu Bodhi, many older ones. There's going to be a new Sujato translation apparently next month. What I found was that some of them were really accurate. Some of them were really interesting, shall we say. But but they weren't mostly meant to be sung, right? There's a certain kind of when you have that precision of meaning, then sometimes the verbiage can be a little bit clinical. And so I thought I wanted an English text that was going to be beautiful to sing and also be immediately understandable. That nobody would need to go home and find out what fabrications are before they can appreciate the text. So I decided to do my own translation of the ones that would be sung in English. And so the first 3 years of the process was really collecting texts, translating them, retranslating, comparing them to other things, and to try to really get a good rendering that was also beautiful and good to sing. Then the next chunk was the most glorious part, was just composing, and it's what I love to do. And it's sort of the big machine. You can have any sound you can imagine when it's choir and orchestra, huge percussion section, and all these things. So just me alone in the studio with a piano and rattling around with these musical ideas, and that was the really glorious part of it.
So I'm wondering, you brought this up about it being sometimes perhaps a bit dry text, shall we say, and yet how music is a way to communicate passion in many ways. Was that a bit of a struggle, merging those two seemingly opposites?
What I decided to do was have a mix of different texts. So some of them are kind of these big philosophical statements like Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, a list of this and a list of that. Some were more kind of the beautiful devotional texts, like something from the Udana or Sarana or something like that. But I also had kind of a soft spot for the more dramatic texts. Like, I don't know if you know the Sapadasa, these two wonderful collections, the Therigatha and the Therigatha. And they're both poems of the, of the nuns, the monks of the first generation or so on. And they tend to have these more almost melodramatic stories that go with them. So Sapadasa is this monk who is just had it. He made no progress. He's been, practicing for years, and he decides he's going to commit suicide. He has out the knife, and at that moment, he's struck by this insight. So, a little bit on the dramatic side. Others that I just find really humorous. There's one that's kind of the poem of a monk who's fat and lazy and, rolling around like a pig. And so you have music that kind of sounds like that. If it works properly, some of it will be lovely, some of it will be weird, some of it will be funny, and then some of it will be the philosophical meat of the thing as well.
So what were some of your musical inspirations to this?
I don't know about your listenership, but one of my really great musical models was John Corigliano, this great American composer who's written fantastic orchestral music, opera, and so on, and manages to be very creative, very original, but also tries to kind of grab the whole world with his music. So lots of different kinds of styles, lots of different kinds of approaches, some things that are just beautiful and glorious, and some that are, he wrote symphonies and chamber music, but also wrote film music. So he's got a horror movie that was nominated for an Academy Award and all that. So my thinking is just try to grab the whole world musically. That was probably his music was definitely an early inspiration for me. There's also Bill Bockham, maybe knows Songs of Innocence and Experience, which is just a great classic, multi-award winning, wonderful, wonderful piece. If anyone takes anything away from this conversation, maybe it's go listen to Bill Bolcom's Songs of Innocence and Experience.
So what's it been like for you to combine these aspects of your life, Buddhism and music?
That is a great question, because it's not obvious. There's not, at least in the Theravadan world, a lot of great music. It's sort of discouraged among the monks. There's passages saying that they shouldn't go to musical shows. And actually, I as a part of this, I wanted to invite as many of the monastics in the area as possible. And there was some kind of back and forth about, well, is this, is it okay? On the one hand, it's a musical show. On the other hand, it's, recitations of the Pali Canon. And so far, the answer has been yes, but also questions, right? So if you can't get as far as, oh yes, of course, definitely, that's fine, then it's interesting territory. Mm-hmm. So there are fewer models than you might expect. Certainly in the classical orchestral world, there's not a lot of straightforwardly Buddhist music. So the other part of it is that there just isn't an obvious connection between the two for the most part. It wasn't, I know composers that say they meditate in order to come up with ideas or something like that, but in the way I meditate, that's not the idea at all. You're not supposed to be meditating, coming up with ideas, so I don't use that method at all. But there was one connection that I've kind of come to over the years that I think is relevant anyway. As part of being a composition teacher, one of the things I was trying to think about, trying to talk to my students about, has been where do ideas come from? And it's very mysterious, of course, for any kind of idea. Where do they come from? It could be, a scientific hypothesis or a plot for a story or a bit of music or anything like that. It's very mysterious. You try to look at your mind having an idea and it doesn't work, right? It's a little like trying to remember somebody's name. You forget a name, you try to think about it, you look into your mind, sort of trying to recall the name, and it doesn't come, it doesn't happen. It's just this, it's just a void. And then either it arises out of the void or it doesn't. And you can't do it. You can't make yourself have the idea. You can't make yourself remember the name. And in a way, I think the relationship there is with anatta. If you look for yourself, if you look for your soul, if you look for your true self, what you realize is the more you look, the less you can find it. And in much the same way, if you try to look at those processes of having an idea or bringing something to mind, you realize it's not mine. I'm not in control of it. It's not me that's doing this, but rather it's a unconscious, preconscious, something process that's happening that is arising within us, but is not us doing it. And that's about as close as I could get to putting those two things together.
So tell us about the work itself. I know there are a number of people who are fans of classical music, opera, who will really want to hear about this. So dazzle them. We'll know more about this than I will.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if you could, I thought it might be interesting to just see what the score looks like. Here's the choral score, and you know, you got a few staves, I suppose. I don't know how much you can get from any of that.
For those who are listening, there's a lot of black dots on paper.
Right. And then here's the orchestral score, which is 3 volumes worth of stuff.
Several inches of very big paper covered with dots.
So it's, as I said, 28 different sections, each of them trying to come up with a wildly different emotion, but also the style of music that I compose in. And by the way, if anybody's interested, I don't know if you are, I have you can hear some of my music at mooneast.com. I've got stuff on Spotify and so on. So, you know, there's that. But the tradition I come from is kind of experimental classical music, not the most avant-garde, but also not what you're thinking of if you're thinking either of Mozart or Puccini or anything like that. So it's trying out new ideas, experimenting. For example, I do part of the Anatalakkhana Sutta. And in the first half of that, what I do is I take the choir and I split it into 6 parts. And then each part starts by singing a really very simple chant tune. And then the next part starts a beat later. And the next one, a beat later, a beat later, a beat later. So it sounds a little bit like this incredible echo machine going on. It's a real challenge to sing, if you can imagine singing one beat off from, you know, possibly the person next to you. And then as it starts, it builds and it builds until there's just this kind of wall of sound almost. And then inside that wall, I cut and I carve and I pull pieces out, and this one stops singing and that one stops singing. And there's only a few moments in the piece where everybody's doing that entire echo box together. So it's, you know, on the one hand, a lovely chant, familiar, but it's not utterly straightforward music. Another section I have, you know, wild rhythms, constantly changing meters, very kind of intensely percussion oriented kinds of music that, you know, might be more associated with like math rock or something like that than with traditional classical music. Other sections, lovely choral, you know, major mode. I have a lovely tereke in A major, you know, that so it should be a wild variety of different kinds of sounds that you would hear.
So what was it like for you as been crafting this music and putting together the words and all of it, and you come to a rehearsal and you put this music and these librettos in front of people, and you yourself are actually hearing the full composition for the first time? What was that like for you hearing this?
That is a remarkable experience. You know, as if you're writing, if you're an author, whether it's a blog post or a novel or whatever, you do everything. You do it, and it's done. Maybe you have an editor, but there's no one else that you need to realize your work. But if you're writing plays or scripts and then music, it does require these other people to actually instantiate it. It's impossible to. Well, I suppose there are people that can make. They can play their own music, but not orchestral music, not choral music. So you're right. You're dependent on these other people to have the vision come forward. And partly it's scary, but then also it can just be spectacularly wonderful. I mean, when you work with great musicians, they always bring more to it than you do. You know, so they have ideas of their own. They're able to interpret and play really music more beautifully than is on the page. I got to read a piece last year for Georgia Flizanis, this fantastic violinist, and I'm just convinced that it's a vastly better piece for her having performed it first because of all that she brought to the table as a performer. And so I'm sure it'll be that way this way as well. Usually, the first rehearsal for a new piece is the worst thing you've ever heard. They're not familiar with it. If there's any mistakes in it, that's when they're going to come out. But on top of it, the performers, have never heard it. If it's a premiere, there's no recording, so they have no idea what it sounds like. So they're not playing it as well as they will after having rehearsed it. And what they're hearing is bad. So, when a professional orchestra comes to play Beethoven 5, they know what it sounds like intimately. They probably played it before. So the first rehearsal already sounds amazing, and then it just gets better than that. In a premiere, the first rehearsal sounds terrible, and everybody leaves saying, "Oh my God, that sounded terrible. Is this what we're playing?" So I can't think how many experiences I've had where I just thought, "Oh, this is going to be a catastrophe." I can tell you with this, at least so far, the orchestra sounds amazing. They're playing so well. The first rehearsal already is even some of the really difficult pieces. They just sounded amazing, and it's only going to get better. So I'm very, very hopeful. Now the choir has a harder part. So when they get back from tour, then they'll start it in on earnest, and I'll let you know more soon.
Okay, great.
But if the St. Olaf choir can't do it, then nobody can.
So, Justin, what else do you want to share with listeners about this particular piece and what it means to you?
For me, when I first started doing Buddhism, first started doing meditation, I was very much attracted to meditation. I wanted to learn how to do it. I was interested in mindfulness, all of these things. And that's what I find that most people are interested in, at least in the United States at first. It's the great entree. You read some news stories saying, "Hey, mindfulness can lower your blood pressure. Awesome. I'm going to try that. It sounds better than exercising. Go for it." All that's true. That's awesome. That's what people should do. But at least for me, I started realizing that different meditation teachers were teaching different things, even ones that claimed the same, this is exactly how the Buddha taught it 2,000 years ago, that they would teach different things. And so even to the point of teaching the same different things about the same sutta. So for me, I just got interested in getting to the bottom of this and reading them, the suttas themselves. I'm a college professor. So as a professor, I thought, well, I need to go to primary sources here. I need to be able to make my own judgment about what these things mean. And it was revelatory. Soon after doing it, I realized, what have I been doing all these years? Reading articles about something, having other people tell me what they thought the Buddha said about this or that. And I really felt like it was only when I came to the suttas in their close to possible original form and started trying to practice in the way that I was reading there, studying in the way that I was reading there, that I came to much deeper understanding of what Buddhism was about what meditation could be. And I hope that for lots more people. I know that they can be extremely intimidating, even off-putting the first time you do it. I read just a couple of individual suttas, and then the first thing I bought, I remember very well, was this. But massive Samyutta Nikaya from Bhikkhu Bodhi, and I turned to chapter 1, page 1, and started reading, and it's poems to devas for about 1,000 pages, and it was kind of a hard slog, especially at first. It was worth it to keep going. It was worth it to keep reading, and I knew what was there, and I was able to find a lot there. What I'm hoping is that this can be the path, that this can be some small way of people coming to some of these texts that are the most beautiful, the most dramatic, and coming to them in a way that has emotional resonance, and then sort of want more. Maybe want more classical music, maybe want more Buddhist suttas, and who knows. Even if not, though, it's just a pleasure to be able to bring some of these ideas and words to people that haven't had any kind of experience with it before.
Well, for those who want to find out more, I've got a couple links on the episode page for this episode, including to mooneast.com, which is Justin's page. And I'll also be putting in some of the St. Olaf links that will be talking about this as well. Justin Merritt, thank you so much for being here. Really good seeing you again.
Such a pleasure to talk to you again, Ted. Thanks.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the SBA website at secularbuddhism.org, and you'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. Discussion about this episode can be found on the episode page itself, along with show notes. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizen Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are linked on the SBA site on the About Podcast Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.